So are all our panelists ready? If you give me a thumbs up, we're good to go. Awesome, great. So at Imagine Cities, we have two different types of webcasts. Our common ground webcasts are all about having conversations about the issues facing cities. Our second webcast, which is called Outside the Box, brings in those people who are trying to solve those problems, who are actively in that space. And today we're hosting our first Outside the Box event, Getting Food to the People. I anticipate that we may go over our allocated time, but we'll eventually work out the kinks and get it right on time. So there are 4 million Canadians and over 800 million people globally who do not have access to enough food. Coupled with this, $17 billion coupled with this is $17 billion in food waste that Canadians create each year. In 2011, the United Nations reported that 1/3 of global food supply is either lost or goes to waste. So our question today is, how are creative minds shifting the landscape to ensure more food can get to those who need it the most? I'm very inspired with the list of panelists that we have with us today, who are each in their individual way working to solve this food access issue. First up, we have Lourdes Juan, who's the founder and executive director of Leftovers Foundation, an organization that reduces food waste and provides healthy food to those in need. Through their app and partnering with restaurants, bakeries, grocers, and distributors, they redirect perfectly good food that would have ended up in the landfill to service agencies who need that food. By doing so, they assist agencies in reducing their grocery bill, help the environment by reducing waste, and reduce the cost of disposing excess food by food donors. Most recently, the organization has launched a mobile grocery store platform called Fresh Routes. Next up, we have Tanya Koszowski. Correct me if I mispronounce that. Is the executive director of Brown Bagging for Calgary Kids. BB4CK is an institution in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, having been established over 30 years ago. The organization aims to ensure that every child in school who needs a lunch has one. The team of volunteers at the organization makes and delivers lunches to schools across Calgary to get food to young people. Oh, sorry about that. I see that that it flipped to Ran. So Ran Goel is the founder and CEO of Fresh City Farms, an organic grocery and meal delivery service that focuses on getting their food from local suppliers. They also operate their own farms, growing fresh and healthy food. Formerly a Wall Street investment lawyer, Ran made the jump to the food industry after discovering how societal issues from labor to climate change are influenced by how we feed ourselves. He completed his Juris Doctor at the University of Toronto. And Paul Taylor. Paul is the executive director of Food Share Toronto, a nonprofit community food organization focused on the entire system that puts food on our tables, from growing, processing, and distributing food to its purchasing, cooking, and consumption. Paul is an experienced leader in the nonprofit sector and an innovator in food-based initiatives, spending much of his life working to eliminate poverty. In addition to his work at Food Share, Paul also serves as a board advisor for Marigold Capital and teaches at Simon Fraser University. I'd like to welcome all of our guests and panelists for joining us and thank you for joining us today. Supporting me on our production is William Ibokwe. Say hi, William. William will be helping us out with our back-end production needs.
Anyway,
Hey, Will, how are you doing? All right?
yeah, I thought my mic was already on. Sorry.
No problem, no problem. That's half of us that think our mic is on. Um, so we're gonna explore a variety of different questions when it comes to our panelists, and I'm excited to see what their answers are. So first off, I mean, the panelists that we have on today are very talented individuals that could be doing many other things. So my first question ties to like why food access? Why did you choose this problem to help solve? And to start off, we'll go with Lourdes and hear what she has to say.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much for having me. Yeah, it's a good question to start with. You know, I think for me, so my background is in urban planning. That's I have a master's of environmental design. So my professional background is not in food systems or food work at all, or the nonprofit or charitable world for that matter. And I think, you know, for me, one day it was just seeing the sheer amount of food that we were wasting here in Calgary, just at a local bakery. And I think that really opened my eyes 8 years ago to how much food we waste. And I think, you know, Ron, you went over, I think it's 17 billion. I think that number is updated. And the last number that I have in Canada that we waste is $49.5 billion worth of food. In the United States, it's $170 billion. So kind of understanding that, you know, part of that is unavoidable food waste, but there is a huge chunk of that is avoidable. And that's what I was just sort of seeing and experiencing at the retail level. And so as an entrepreneur, I was working out of coffee shops, and I would just ask them if I could come back at the end of the day, or if I stayed until they closed, if I could pick up the food and bring it to a shelter or to an organization that could use it instead of it going into the garbage, because I knew that there was a better use for that. So for me, that's kind of, you know, why that issue was chosen at the beginning. And then it just led down a whole rabbit hole of stuff and learnings. And I'm sure everyone on the panel can speak to this as well, but we certainly learn things even today, almost a decade later.
Paul, did you want to tell your story?
Sure. First of all, thank you so much for having me here. It's a real pleasure. You know, I think the opportunity to work at an organization like FoodShare that recognizes that food is a right and that all people should have access to it, for me, has been really important. Not only because I grew up materially poor and living in a food insecure household, but because food insecurity, I think, in this country, we're in a place where we're at an unequivocal crisis around food insecurity. In fact, I'm also going to update the number that you shared earlier. You know, I think we used to say that there were about 4.4 million people that were food insecure, but it's actually, you know, the most recent reports by StatsCan suggest that the number has skyrocketed to closer to 5.5 million people. So when you think about how many people that is, you know, it's almost equivalent to the populations of the cities of Toronto, Montreal, and Winnipeg. So for me and many of my colleagues at FoodShare, we just don't understand how some of our elected leaders can even go to sleep at night, knowing that they could end some of the suffering associated with poverty and food insecurity tomorrow. They just choose not to. You know, myself personally, I've lived the urgency of this need, and I think it's absolutely unnecessary that anyone else should have to. So maybe I'll leave it at that for now.
And Tanya, why did you get into food access?
Sure, thanks, and welcome everyone. Great to be here. For me, my personal why is that I want to encourage people so they feel empowered to be the best they can be. And when my son was 5 years old going into kindergarten, and that was he was his first chance to go away in the big world, and I'd pack his little snack made with love, then became aware of the reality that there were so many kids going to school without that food, or even that food made with love. And so it became very apparent to me that an opportunity for me to encourage kids that they can be their best by a simple act of a lunch was one way I could do that and be part of doing that, and do that with a lot of people that really want to collaborate and work together to feed hungry kids so they can reach their full potential. So that was my reason why I connected with the organization 18 plus years ago to ensure kids could be the best they could be.
That's awesome. Ran?
First of all, honored to be here tonight. Thanks for inviting me. For us at Fresh City, we're a bit different than the other panelists in the sense that we're a for-profit organization with all the potential and I guess the limits that structure creates. So for me, creating the city, creating Fresh City, the question was, how do we change people's consciousness around food? And that's why we started with urban farming. I think the answer to food insecurity or food access, in my mind, is ultimately alleviating inequality, so people can have the dignity of buying their own food and not have to rely on handouts. And in my mind, to do that, there's the acts that a lot of policies that need to change, but fundamentally we need more political will and more consciousness amongst the electorate that food is an issue, and it's an issue obviously from an access and insecurity perspective, but also the various environmental implications of how we make our food, and the huge labor implications of how we make our food, process our food, and sell our food. So that's what I was kind of hoping to do with starting Fresh City, and that's what we try to infuse into our day-to-day within the confines of the kind of a capitalist framework, if you will.
Amazing stories from all of you on why you chose this issue to impact. Clearly our data is off, and we'll definitely come back with updated research. But something that I've been thinking about during this time is just housing, water, food, all these basic necessities that we need for life. And the biggest players out there are Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and you kind of wonder, how do we break this mold of what we find value in? And the courage and the tenacity that all of you have in identifying this issue and going head first into it is quite inspirational. Next up, I told everyone about your organizations, and they're fantastic organizations, but is there anything that you wanted to add about what your organization does that I may have missed that is important for you to mention? We'll start the other way around. We'll start with Ran, if you don't mind.
I don't think much beyond what you've said. We are in our 9th or 10th year of growing and selling food in Toronto. Over the years, we've morphed into an omni-channel grocer. So beyond just growing food, the biggest part of our business now is selling food. And I think at the core of what we're trying to achieve that's different than other kind of grocery retail out there is a focus on sourcing and sourcing, with social impacts in mind and with environmental impacts in mind. And I could say, one of the biggest challenges of that, and I think this will be touched upon indirectly, I think, by the other panelists, I'd imagine, is the consolidation of our food industry, and that goes from retail to the farm, to all the intervening entities. It's a huge struggle, and I think it kind of, in a way, it speaks to where our kind of society is going, to become a much more unequal one. But B, it also impacts who gets to choose what food makes it to the shelf, and in what neighborhoods that food makes it there, and what the nutritional profile of that food is. So that's part of what we're trying to kind of address, is that there needs to be a place for small business and for multinational conglomerates in our food system, which increasingly there just isn't.
Tanya, did you have anything to add? Or did we cover everything?
I think the one thing I would add about brown bagging, so a lot of times we think it's this just simple act of a lunch, but our vision is really that communities are ensuring there are no hungry kids. So it's about giving people the opportunity to be part of feeding and caring for kids. It's a real community-based solution and mindset, because not only do kids need this food to grow and learn and be their best, but they also need that sense of caring and belonging. And we know, when we look at our statistics and reasons for poverty, that sense of that one person that cares about you can make all the difference in the world in terms of your mental health and your self-worth and self-esteem. So for us, it's about people caring for these kids with this act of a lunch, and that's makes us more, we'll often say we're more than a lunch. It's more about what the community could do. It takes a village to raise a child. So.
That's awesome. Paul, you guys do a lot at Food Shares. I know I missed something.
We do, and the odd thing is that often when people hear the name Food Share for the first time, they think that, that we might be giving out free food or I don't know. There's always a whole host of misconceptions people have about Food Share based on our name. So what I can say is, Food Share collaborates alongside communities and community leaders to build resident-led or community-led food infrastructure. So we're talking about things like urban farms, community produce markets, school meal programs, and community gardens, that sort of thing. But we are pretty adamant infrastructure. We can't pretend or position our work as a solution just so that folks will donate more money to us. Instead, what we do is we boldly acknowledge that we actually can't solve the issues alone, and that charity should never be expected to do so. So we loudly advocate for some of the things Rand talked about, some of those missing pieces like effective public policy and political leadership focused on tackling poverty and food insecurity once and for all.
Lourdes?
Thank you. Yeah, I'll echo some of those sentiments. That's definitely something that we learned over time, is that we wanted to be more than sort of this Band-Aid solution of bringing food from one place to the next. And really, over the years have focused on community mobilization and making sure that that collaboration piece is in place. And that we're talking to, food waste at all different levels and where we can kind of pick that up. And I think now leftovers rescues in Calgary, Edmonton, and Winnipeg, and a few small cities, about 10,000 pounds of food per week. And sort of the curse of food excess is that it happens kind of at all different stages. And so that's from getting food to our plates, and then when it's on our plates, us wasting that food. So leftovers is starting to do a lot more incubation, like Fresh Roots that Ron mentioned, is a mobile grocery store that we incubated underneath leftovers to start with, and then it grew its own legs and got too big for the charity to handle. And so we moved that out into a social enterprise, and so that's now its own organization. And we have several programs that we're incubating and looking at as part of leftovers to kind of, add this sort of entrepreneurial lens to the food systems work. And I think one of the things that we're looking at on top of that is making sure that we are meeting people where they're at. So wherever on the food insecurity spectrum you are as a household, we want to make sure that we have programs that speak to that.
I've been reading a lot about neuroscience and nutrition, and how inequality starts in the womb with regards to the nutrition mothers get. And then when you're born until you're 6 or 7, the major growth your brain takes and your access to nutrition becomes so critical to that. And so, there's so many layers to inequity and inequality. And when we dive into it, a lot of it makes so much sense to see how inequality builds upon itself. So when you are, if you meet someone in grade 5 who, comes from a more affluent, well-resourced family, you're not actually in the same level because of the inequity that you have faced earlier in your life, and that goes throughout. So, Lourdes, you kind of chimed into our next question, and that deals with metrics, right? Like we talk about, how do you know that your organization is successful? And what we would like to learn is, like, how do you measure that? And there could be, for some folks it's dollars and cents, and for other folks it's how many kids do we get a lunch to. So with that in mind, I was hoping Tanya could maybe start off on this question of metrics.
Sure. So there's a few different measurements at play, and I would also say for us, we'd love our metrics to be zero, right? We'd love there not to be a need for the hungry kids. So what's the root cause of that? We know that where we sit in sort of the stream of that, we're just one part of the puzzle, and somewhat a band-aid solution, because there's living wage, root cause, education, all pieces in this system that are part of this. And the reason we are here, and an unfortunate number of growing hungry kids, is that kids still aren't responsible for parents' choices, and parents are still making good choices, but still struggling to make ends meet. So some of our metrics in saying that would be, we are aware of about 5,000 hungry kids every day in Calgary. We ended the school year last year, which wasn't a school year really, it was kids at home, but we're still us finding ways to reach hungry kids with over 6,300 hungry kids. We were offering grocery gift cards and a food finder app through. So that's a number for us. As we look at the number of hungry kids, we want to see that decrease. Unfortunately, it keeps on increasing. We've had great access to our families, especially the last 6 months. So we take some of our metrics for knowing that where we're at by talking to our families and our kids to say, what do you need? How can we help? What's the situation? What's the best way for us to feed and care for you? And then in terms of that, we also talk to those stakeholders, communities. So we take measurements from our community. As I said, communities is a big part of what we do. Our teachers, those are our champions in the schools, even when school's out, and staff, and our donors. So those are some of the metrics that we're used to know that we're meeting that need. And then and I don't always love this, but the reality is as an independently funded organization, that metric is, do we have the money to meet the need that's growing, and working to raise those funds for that. And then be part of other bigger conversations. How can we advocate? What tables can we sit at to be communicating and even offering collaboration, or some of the ways we would sort of try and tackle this. And we're a pretty on the ground grassroots organization as well, right? We're kind of the ones on the front line, kind of just trying to make sure kids that are hungry are getting fed and getting cared for. So those are a few of our metrics that kind of measure where we're at in terms of success, or in terms of just meeting the need, and that's out there.
Yeah, I remember, we're going to get to the conversation around pivoting later, but I remember when the pandemic first started, and there was a post that came up on your Instagram feed on this house that had a table set up in front of it and just food, and all you said is, come get some food if you need it. And it was quite touching, and I had a bit of an emotional reaction just looking at community come together like that, and it was very powerful. So thank you for that. Paul, did you want to chat about the metrics that you use at FoodShare?
FoodShare is focused on Toronto. So if I would just say briefly, our vision is that we live in a Toronto where all people can feed themselves, their loved ones, and their communities with dignity and joy. So we're hyper focused on that, and doing everything we can to ensure that folks in Toronto have access to the food that they need. That's the most important metric, I would say, for us. And I think sometimes it's easy to get distracted with a whole bunch of other stuff, but and mission drift and all sorts of things. But we try our best to stay razor focused on what it is we're trying to achieve, and it's making sure that folks in Toronto have access to the food that they need.
And Ran, something that Fresh City brings to mind for me, it isn't just access to food, it's access to quality food. right? You know, and the impact that that has on people, kids, adults, and, you know, their ability to deal with stress and all that sort of stuff. But so, I mean, there's a ton of metrics that you could look at, especially being a for-profit company. So do you want to chime in a bit about what you look at?
Yeah, I mean, I can speak a bit about the kind of stuff that we look at day to day, and the stuff that I wish I could look at day to day. So, I mean, certainly, obviously, as a for-profit revenue, and you know, when I started the business, you know, my intention was how can we make sure that every dollar of revenue we gain is making our community better and making people healthier. And I think to a large extent, I feel pretty good about, you know, every buck that we generate, take away from the conventional grocers, I think is doing a better job at that, at returning to the community and building up a better food system. Profit loss, obviously, and then there's a whole host of metrics because we're an online grocer. So, you know, website traffic, how many people convert, how much they spend, that kind of stuff. A lot of boring operational metrics like, you know, labor efficiency in various parts of the operation. And things of that nature, how much we're spending on supplies. You know, but the part that, you know, we have one of our biggest investor is Good and Well, which is a social impact fund. And, you know, some of, I think, of the most powerful things that we're hopefully impacting is the stuff that's actually really hard and or expensive to measure. So, for example, you know, we focus in a big way on local, we focus in a big way on organic, you know, all the bananas we bring in are fair trade. But it's hard, you know, if you're looking at, for example, the carbon that we're hopefully keeping in the ground or not being emitted. It's really hard to compare, you know, the apples that we source, say, or the bananas that we source versus conventional. So those are the kind of numbers I'd love to be able to say, hey, Fresh City customer, you're, you know, reducing carbon by 50% compared to if you shopped at Walmart or something like that. So that's one, and then certainly on the social impact side of it as well. So in terms of supporting smaller farms, supporting the fair trade label wherever it's available, like with avocados, blueberries, bananas, chocolate, coffee, things like that. So I'd say, like, where our biggest focus is also the biggest area where it's a bit of a black box to get easily accessible metrics to make you feel, you know, to be able to know that you're making a difference on those things at the end of the day.
And Lourdes, I know you message a lot around your metrics and food that you saved, and in particular the food that you've been able to reallocate. And you have, I saw a few weeks back a new platform around restaurants or bakeries using some of the goods that you're able to find. But yeah, for metrics for you, what do you look at?
Yeah, so for us, you know, I think we still track how much food we divert, and we convert that into CO2 equivalents, and we definitely have those types of metrics. They're good, you know, it's part of the reason why we created the app, so that volunteers could sign on, track how much food they're bringing from one place to the next. We can track volunteer hours and all of that. But we actually use none of those metrics to determine our success internally. What we look at is community mobilization. So that's how many volunteers are signing up, how many unique volunteers do we have, how many vendors are involved, how many service agencies are involved, because I think that's part of the important part of involving everybody in this, you know, global problem of food excess, is making sure that it's top of mind. And so the amount of people involved is really important to us. On the fresh fruit side, I mean, I definitely relate to a lot of what Rand's saying in terms of, you know, how many transactions and sort of that profit loss. And really, you know, because it's a social enterprise for us, we want to make sure that as our income increases, so does our social good, and the two pieces kind of work in tandem. But at the end of the day, we're really looking at how are we increasing healthy food in communities, and how we're bringing food into communities with dignity. And I think, you know, just from an urban planning perspective, we have built our cities really, you know, they're not very equitable. We have discount grocery stores on the very outskirts, or at least in Calgary. And then we have a ton of food deserts and food slums where we can get access to food, but it may not be the healthiest type of food. And so having a mobile grocery store deliver that food and show up right at community, have no, you know, proof of income, be culturally appropriate, and be healthy is something that we kind of look at in terms of looking at our success.
That's amazing. I remember, just full disclosure, I met Ran when he first started at Fresh City, and he was at, for those who are from Toronto or know Toronto, was at Downsview Park. He had his first farm, and I was so excited, and I would talk to folks about what Ran was trying to do, and they would say to me, "Oh, that land will just get developed. He'll get pushed out. The land will get developed." And I was like, "Where are our priorities?" You know, when Ran was talking about climate change and you know, access to healthy food and local food and stuff like that. So it's quite inspiring to see that company still going, and so just back on Lourdes's comments around how we build cities and how we use land is a very important part of that. So next up we have overcoming challenges. So can you identify a significant challenge you've had to overcome in your organization? It could be even trying to save the organization, and how you were able to do it. And I wanted to start this off with Paul. Has there been a significant challenge that you've come across with FoodShare, and how did you overcome it?
Yeah, I think there have been. You know, it's been an interesting 3 years. It's been a lot of fun. I work with a great team. I think some of the challenges that we interact with is around how we understand, like as a country, how we understand food insecurity. So the challenge that I'm going to talk about is one that we certainly haven't overcome, but that we remain committed to doing what we can to push back against this kind of unhelpful narrative. And I recognize in a lot of spaces it makes me unpopular for sharing some of these thoughts. But you know, I really struggle with some of the excitement sometimes that's around, you know, these sort of food waste or food excess excess produce kind of redistribution schemes, because I think it takes our eyes away from the prize a little bit, you know, because we know that food insecurity in this country in large part is not about an availability of food. It's predominantly about a lack of income. So I worry that these sorts of schemes kind of reinforce a two-tiered food system, where some of us are enjoying the benefits and choice associated with like local and organic produce, while those that are materially poor are often treated like walking compost bins. I think it's often undignified and really detracts us from the issue at hand. So I think focusing the public narrative on the redistribution of things like three-legged carrots has the potential to do exactly what food banks have done in this country since 1981. They will pervert our understanding of what food insecurity in this country means and continue to allow governments to turn a blind eye to their right to food obligations, in turn, making food insecurity an issue for charity as opposed to public policy. And I think, lastly, it's important to remember that often instead of these corporations paying the costs associated with their overproduced, mislabeled, or unsellable products, you know, they reach out for their handy cost-saving loophole. You know, charities focused on food waste to come and take it away at no cost to the corporation. And then we give these companies halos, photo ops, and news coverage for this, while the food charity deploys volunteers to sort through their donations, and the charity is left holding the bag of having to pay the costs associated with dumping the items that the charity can't distribute. You know, I think large food companies are notorious for overproduction of their products. It's tied to the profit motivation. We can't buy a sprig of rosemary from the grocery store, even if it's all that we need, because you know, these large companies know that buying those bunches, which I never seem to get to the end of, is more profitable than selling that one sprig of rosemary. So I really think it's time for enough of these kind of distractions. We're at a really critical time. We definitely have to deal with food waste. It's having significant impacts on climate change, but I get very concerned when we start to mix the issues of poverty and food insecurity and food waste. People are not compost bins. I think we need to be clear about the issue and collectively push for long-term solutions. And I think poverty and food insecurity, I've said it before and I'll say it again, are not inevitable. And we can do something about both of these things. And I think that's where we need to focus.
Fair point. There's that whole idea of, not kind of filling the gaps and filling holes, instead of going directly to what the problem is. And you see it throughout, right? Like housing, for example. We have shelters, or we have there's been huge criticism around food banks, and, providing canned food and stuff like that. And that is definitely a conversation to be had. Rand, did you want to comment on any challenges that that your organization faces and has faced, and anything that you've been able to do to overcome that?
Yeah, I guess I'll answer it at two levels. I mean, I think there's a lot of day-to-day struggles, and you hear all these, entrepreneur sob stories of how, cash flow crunches and raising capital and all that stuff. And I think, we're not unlike, I think, any other small business in that respect. Have had and have our share of struggles. But I think that's like the one side. The second side, I think, is more kind of fundamental to the raison d'etre of the business, really, and it's this daily struggle of trying to push the ball forward in how we source. On the one hand, and there's a struggle with the consumer in a way, because turns out people don't want to have potatoes and garlic all winter, even though that's the best climate change answer, or the best nutritional answer probably as well, in some respect. So there's that constant struggle to be like, actually, no, you should have your salad in a jar because it's reusable and we can then wash it, and it's not, you're getting away from single-use plastic. So there's those kinds of sets of kind of struggles, if you will. And on the other hand is this reality of, and that's all to do with living in this cheap food world that we all live in. And on the other hand is the issues that that Paul brings up, which is the reality of it is the food that Fresh City sells is not accessible for a material part of the population. So you're kind of sitting there thinking, yeah, you're creating this convenient way for people to eat organic and healthy and more local and with better packaging and all that stuff, while knowing that it's out of reach for a lot of people, and the people that we've kind of the most vulnerable people in our society. And you can you sit back and you're like you can only deal with so many problems at a time. So I do think we're making a dent in supporting the local food economy and supporting local makers and supporting farmers in a way that's more environmentally friendly and better for our communities. But you can't sit and be happy. At least I'm not. And feel at peace with what you're doing when there's a lot of people being left behind.
Yeah, for sure. And the ability to access, and we get back to it, right? The importance of nutrition, not just access to food, but access to nutritious food, is that theme that continues to play. And the layer, and I had mentioned earlier around the layers of inequity and how that builds upon each other. So and the weight of that. Tanya, did you want to chat a bit about a challenge that your organization has faced and how you overcame it?
Sure. I'll give one that's sort of similar to this theme, and then one that might be a little bit different, but it's very real, so we're going to be honest. Yeah, I would say, the challenge that we've seen when we look at our increase in hungry kids doubling over a period of time, a very short period of time, that's a challenge. There's something wrong with that. So what's the root cause? Why are these kids hungry? Why do their families not have enough to provide for them? So yeah, we are not as probably just for time and capacity and resources as vocal and as prominent in sort of some of that advocacy space that we want to be, but we are more and more becoming aware that as we see this need increase, because like I said, we're a Band-Aid solution. I actually don't want to be here. I want these families to have what they need, and that root cause and living wage and all those pieces. So that for sure is a challenge for us. Because then you just have to mobilize lots of different pieces to get that going, because we just don't, you know, our goal is no hungry kids, so we don't want kids to be going hungry. So that's definitely an organizational challenge. And then, you know, I'll keep it real grassroots and simple. Sometimes people is the challenge. When you're trying to get boards and stakeholders and volunteers and staff and people that don't agree and, you know, all those moving parts, it's and opinions and different perspectives, that sometimes that can be a challenge. And I'll, like, you know, I'm a pretty simple person in terms of like, let's feed these kids and give them the best they can be. And when you're taking, and all these other things become, try to infiltrate and take you away from that focus, that can be a challenge, to just keep everybody aligned and purpose driven and their value and the impact of those kids being fed. So yeah, that's also some of the challenge as things start to grow, and how you get people aligned and moving in the same direction when there's all these other forces. And then COVID's a challenge. So
Yeah, it's an understatement. I saw photos of, you know, of food banks in the U.S. and lineup of cars to no ends, which is terrifying that people cannot get access to a basic necessity. And we're a bit ahead of schedule, so I'm going to ask another question after Lourdes around mental health. Around how you manage your mental health. I know running Imagine Cities is challenging, and sometimes you know, I need to take a break from it and step back and then come back to it, recharged. So just think about that. But next up, I just want to hear your thoughts, Lourdes, and just like a challenge that you've had to overcome with your organization.
It's, you know, Ron, it's a good question, and I want to sort of respond to it by also responding to some of Paul's comments. I think, you know, I would agree with Paul in a lot of ways, but, you know, it ties back to your question, because I think one of our biggest challenges as an organization has been around, how do we not be a Band-Aid? How do we move from being something that is this you know, redirection solution to something that's more productive and digs deeper. Anyone who knows me knows I'm an advocate for moving away from food banks and canned food and free food. I'm one of those critics, and yet I started an organization that redirects that excess. And while we don't want to glorify that, we want to get that work done in the meantime. But I think really thinking critically about how we do that is important. You know, it's why we don't give tax receipts to vendors that ask for them. It's why we make sure that we're not awarding waste. And so, you know, I think on the political side too, it's why I'm fairly vocal and really politically active. And if we go back to Ron's you know, suggestion around affordable housing, I sit on an affordable housing board here in Calgary, and I think, you know, the push at a board level is to go from emergency shelters to more long-term affordable housing and different types of solutions that give people choice. And you can really liken that to the food system. Like those basic needs we have treated, you know, really unfairly over the last few decades. And so, you know, how do we move the needle on that while still, you know, addressing our reality? I will say, you know, from a food excess perspective, there are some smaller size vendors smaller and medium sized vendors who we primarily work with, that get the metrics on the food that they're, you know, donating to us. And because of that, they start reducing the amount of food because they now have this data that they can work with, which I think is an important thing to pull as a nonprofit to give to an organization. So I will lastly just agree with Tanya that people are also a challenge. I think pre-COVID, food organizations were not working together. We were all working in silos. And when COVID hit, it was full-on crisis mode for a lot of the food systems players. And it was the first time in 8 years that we had been invited to kind of come together and talk to each other. And so I think getting past that, it'd be a double tragedy if we learned nothing from COVID, and getting past that and working together, I think is something that we need to take forward.
Yeah, the whole idea of cooperation and living in an abundance mindset. My partner continues to tell me about the abundance mindset and how we can use that to help create abundance. So I'm going to go back to that question I had mentioned that we're going to add to the mix here, is mental health. And running an organization that is trying to do amazing work puts you at the front line of the terrible things that are happening with regards to food access. And Tanya, with meeting kids who need lunch, that's tough. That would be tough for me to see that. And running a company that needs to pay its wages and have a business model that is viable for the short and long term, because we know healthy food is an important part of this entire conversation. So I just wanted to talk about your mental health and the struggles that you face, and maybe what you do to kind of recharge and rebuild your mental health. So Tanya, do you want to maybe chime in on that?
Sure. Who wants to know about the tears that happened earlier today? Yeah, it's real. And I can empathize with everybody. I can see on the screen and probably on this call, and just every person in this time especially has a story in their home of something, either stress on work, kids at home, loss of job, elderly parents, millions of lots of different issues going on that are real for us as human beings and as leaders in what we do. And then you add on the reality of what we do and why we're here. We care deeply about the work that we do. And I know we kind of reflected back, my team, on March 16th when we sat at the back of our kitchen and schools were closed. It wasn't an option to not. We knew those kids were hungry. We were hearing already that day kids were hungry and going to their schools and trying to find food. So it's hard. I think really what it's about, being real, having your safe places and safe people to let it all out and let it down, that you can just cry or swear or let out some of the frustrations that are real for us as humans. And then for me, it's the practices. So what do I do in terms of moving my body, eating healthy, drinking water, getting sleep, meditating, having my people, giving myself some breathing space. Sometimes literally 5:20, I was dealing with a situation that was pretty intense. And then it was just grounding myself and taking some deep breaths and just reminding myself to what my focus and purpose and mission is, to take care of my mental health. And then knowing when to step away and give yourself a little bit of space and a break is also, I think, a really important thing. And then maybe even in the seriousness and the sadness and the hardships of even COVID, finding ways to like laugh and play and not take ourselves too seriously. And, you know, yeah, my bad, I failed at that. I missed that, you know, and just being gentle on ourselves too, and having all those things. So I'm hot on this topic, so I will stop and pass it on. But my hope is that everybody figures out how to take care of themselves, because this mental health issue is real for so many people in this world.
Yeah. Paul, you go 100 miles an hour, I feel. Like you're on the go all the time. Well, all of you on this call, but I particularly paid attention to Paul because we had just connected on LinkedIn, and the first thing I see is an event, and then he's doing this, and then he's doing that. So that came top of mind of kind of why I asked this question. So Paul, how do you keep your mental health in check when you're, you know, people, they say you're doing good work, so just, you know, be happy with that. But no, doing good work has its challenges. So let's hear it, Paul.
Oh, I guess I could go a number of directions with this, but I think the most important thing that I do in terms of work to prioritize my mental health is hiring badass folks. Folks that get the issues, folks that are willing to be wrong, folks that are willing to be self-critical. You know, I think as an organization and as an individual, you know, FoodShare said some pretty, and I've said over even before FoodShare, some pretty bold things. You know, when you say that things like food banks are a reflection of a broken society, when you talk about these food waste schemes, as I have, you know, and even before that, it was around talking about the need to prioritize tackling anti-indigeneity and anti-racism within our food work. You know, there are so many food organizations that are missing a lens, a race analysis, or don't have positions, don't have folks of color in senior leadership positions. And I think that's a huge problem, because we're working on issues, at least, across the country, that BIPOC folks, people that are Black, Indigenous, and other folks of color are disproportionately affected by. So I think working with people that get those things, working with people that can push me to not only be critical of myself, but also take breaks. And just the one other thing that I'll add is we really, you know, we think about the workplace as well as a significant responsibility. You know, we have a responsibility to help support our colleagues to be able to prioritize their mental health. So, you know, we've been doing a number of things like increasing personal days, increasing pay, increase their pay grid. You know, and what we did with our pay grid increase is we focused on folks at the bottom of the pay grid. They got a 25% increase. Folks at the top got no increase, because we know that those are the folks that are feeling the most amount of pressure. You know, we go from 12 to 1 every day, where we're not allowed to schedule any meetings or have any or send any emails. Yeah, we work after 5. You know, when we were back in the office, I'm known for walking around the office saying, if you stay a minute after 5, I'm going to send you an invoice for rent. You know, so all of those sorts of things are, I think, things that we can do to show that we prioritize mental health for ourselves and for our colleagues.
That's amazing. Invoice for rent. That's something we'll tweet out. Ran. Let's hear it, man.
Yeah, I don't think I'm the best person to call upon on this question, to be honest with you. I think I'm certainly right now I'm out of balance. Honestly, I speak from such a position of privilege. You know, I have parents who love me, a family who loves me, 3 kids who you know, call me a poopy head, and then I can't be sad for too long. So on the whole, honestly, I have a great social support structure. I wasn't ever able to get exercise in, and then I just started biking to work, and that's kind of sorted that part out. But the honest answer is I don't have a good I think mechanisms, certainly for the kind of accelerated pace that we found ourselves over the last 2 years. So yeah, I don't want to sit here as somebody who's figured it out, because I haven't, to be completely frank.
Well, love the honesty. Thanks for that. Lourdes, known in Calgary as the person doing all things everywhere. You run several companies. You sit on boards. You're doing everything. Let's hear it. How do you manage your mental health?
I still don't know if any of those are a good thing. I will say, you know, like Ran, I have a really good support network. I lean on my family a lot. When we were growing up, you know, my mom had multiple jobs, and I remember, you know, she felt that there was a stigma going to the food bank, and so she just got a third job at a grocery store. And, you know, I'm first generation Canadian, but I think that, you know, my family immigrating here, my family understands that immigrant work ethic, and also understanding, you know, that my work is important, but also it's good to kind of take breaks. So I lean on my family a lot. I joke a lot that I own a spa, and so that really helps, but that's actually not, I'm not a client, but I do get to have treatments when I need them. So that's been helpful. But I also give credit to my team. You know, I think there's 40-ish of us now that constantly, you know, during work hours, check in on each other. And I think one of the biggest things that we learned as a team was recognizing our work styles and our personalities, and really sort of adapting our styles so that we can effectively communicate, which really kind of breaks down any kind of communication stress that we could potentially have in our organization. So I would say, you know, having a good cadence that works with you, knowing when to shut down at certain times of the day, and knowing that it's okay to do that and not feeling guilty to do that. But I also think swearing does help as well.
I've been notified by William that I shouldn't have asked that question because we're now behind time, but I thought it was very important. So we're going to head into the next question, and hopefully William will be less angry with me. So the next question is around pivoting. So we all imagine whoop, that went too far ahead. So we'll just move it back here. So pivoting. So we all have this idea of what our organization is and what it's going to be. We have that vision for it, but sometimes what happens is that we have to change that vision, and it's sometimes hard to let go of. So first of all, could you tell us about a time in which you've had to pivot? And then second is, how did you figure out where you're going to pivot to? Let's see, Ran, you look like you're in that thoughtful pose. If you want to chime in on that.
I don't go that far. I think more confused than anything. No, honestly, our business has been a series of pivots. So maybe I'll start right at the beginning, because that's something that Ron can probably speak to. So, you know, my dream when I started the company was a completely decentralized land structure. Basically, that we would farm. We would help teach people learn how to farm. Teach people how to farm. They'd farm in their respective neighborhoods, and we would sell our produce together, kind of under one brand. And this is clearly, like, if you know anything about farming, you realize that, you know, you're not going to learn how to farm in, you know, I think a few weeks was how we thought about it. So that just shows how, you know, my lack of humility and ignorance, frankly, when I started the business. So we started that way, and we had 20 yards under production that first summer, that first growing season. And of course, you know, we get all these calls from these landlords, because it was homeowners, and we, you know, use their backyards or front yards, and they're like, my fucking yard looks like it's a weed patch. Like, you know, and then the member farmers who grew on those lots would suddenly disappear in the middle of the growing season. So long story short, you know, my dream of having this completely decentralized urban farm where people would see farming in action in their neighborhoods did not come to fruition, and we went to a more centralized, albeit still urban area. So that's Downsview Park, where you recall we farmed and still farm we just finishing up our 10th growing season now. But that was the first pivot of many, really, over the last 9 years.
Yeah, I do remember Downsview, and used to have those events there, and you teach people how to grow veggies and all that sort of stuff. That was,
Yeah.
I really enjoyed those. Tanya, did you want to come in next to talk about a bit about how your organization has pivoted?
Sure. So I would say, I think pivoting is probably a new reality for everybody. I think in sort of that design thinking mindset, being agile, adaptable, we have to be able to pivot given because things are out of our control in the world. I think for brown bagging, probably one of the first pivots, larger pivots, was we're probably looking now 8 years ago when we were really centralized with where we were making lunches and then delivering them out to kids. But we had these people coming in that were said, why am I coming all the way downtown when I can make lunch in my community and take it across the street? So that was our first pivot, is to really kind of mobilize the community and give community the opportunity to get engaged. So, and now up in pre-COVID, 50% of our lunches were made in communities, businesses, churches, retirement residents, all over the city, people just wanting to find ways to help feed kids. So that was the first major pivot. And then, I'll speak to, COVID pivot, right? So our distribution point is through schools. Schools are closed. We're kind of going and getting ready. I remember our date of lockdown but we're getting ready to go into lockdown. How do we get food to kids? So the pivot was like in 24 hours, communicating to our family, through our schools, to our families, that if they go on to our website, they can apply for a grocery gift card and we can send grocery gift cards out. So that was a pretty major pivot in a very short period of time, while families were still communicating and getting information from the schools. And that was, so that was and then relaunching a program. We had to use Lourdes' word, of incubated sort of a real pilot project of this thing called Food Finder YYC in the summertime. It was a way for kids to text the word food to a number and then find out where and when in their community they could access food. So it was kind of a little bit of a pilot project for us over the summers to fill a gap and help kids who are hungry in the summertime. And so then the next pivot there was relaunching that and re-envisioning that. And actually probably the post you saw, Ron, was about that. It was, and so the one thing I love about Food Finder is that it's not always just what brown bagging is doing, it's what the people in the community are doing. So I actually think that photo was somebody in the community who just started stepping up to make lunches. And so we just kind of we had lots of people like that around the city that were just doing, and we were just trying to help streamline families to communicate in sort of one place to find out where and when to access food. So those are a few of our pivots. And then I would also say, the reality, we have a team of 15 and a board of 9 that, Zoom. Do we do Zoom like we do now? It was another, how do you engage and have productive and build connection and take care of your team's mental health when now you're online and you're not seeing each other for months at a time? And you still need lots of work to do. So you want to do this. And so that's another pivot, is how we worked as a team when remote reality was very present for us. So those are a few of our kind of big pivots at this point.
Yeah, I remember that post. So shout out to that family in Ogden that set up that table and provided meals to community members. Huge shout out to them. Paul, let's hear it.
Yeah. So our pivot was certainly pandemic inspired as well. We operated this social enterprise called the Good Food Box, where folks could jump online, order a good food box, it gets delivered to their home. One of the ways we're trying to increase access to affordable produce for folks with modest incomes. So what happened is in the city of Toronto, once the pandemic hit, as you can understand, quite a few of the food banks were closing up. I think it was initial reports said 40% of food banks in the city were closing up. And we said to ourselves, oh my goodness, we have these vehicles, we're delivering right to people's homes. We're doing about 300 deliveries a week. So what we started to do was pretty quickly realize that we need to raise some money and for the first time start giving out free food. So really, huge kudos to Ran and his company, one of the first to kind of step up and say, hey, we want to help you and encourage our customers to contribute to this work. And we've gone from those kind of 300 deliveries a week to, at the height of the pandemic, we were up to 6,000 deliveries a week, you know, hired over 100 new folks to work alongside us. So that was like a fair bit of coordination, but also really pleased to be able to provide income and work for folks. But it was a big pivot, and I think I just looked at the number the other day. You know, in the last 6 months from the emergency good food box alone, we've been able to distribute just under 900,000 pounds of fresh produce to folks. And we also, you know, I think did a couple of things that I think were, you know, the team felt really excited and proud about, you know. So I guess one thing that happened was Fedora couriers. Folks may know that Fedora delivery couriers were let go when Fedora decided to move out of the country. So what that did is left 500 couriers in the city of Toronto who were the week prior being, you know, recognized as being essential workers by getting food to people during the pandemic who were without food. So we raised enough money to be able to provide 3 good food boxes over the course of the pandemic to all 500 of the Fedora workers. You know, after the death of Regis Porchinsky-Paquette, a young Black Indigenous woman who died after interactions with the police here in Toronto, a number of folks, Black and Indigenous folks predominantly, were out and at a march demanding justice for Regis. It was the first time, I think, in Toronto where folks were really getting together, leaving their homes and saying, this is a crisis, but so is this. So the organizers of that march suggested to everyone that they should self-isolate for 2 weeks. So there were lots of folks who hadn't planned to self-isolate, didn't know where they were going to get their food from. So what we did is we partnered with the organizers, a group called Not Another Black Life, and we were able to provide good food boxes for those 2 weeks for anyone who attended, any of the families that attended that was worried about where they were going to get their food from. And we prioritized Black and Indigenous families. They reached out to us and we delivered a box of fresh produce to their home. So I think, you know, it was a pivot in the sense that we initiated the good food box, but also a pivot in really thinking about the change we want to see in the world, in the city, in the province, and how we need to be fueling that revolution and making sure that folks who are allies and out on the streets and pushing for the kind of change that we're wanting to see, that they have the food that they need to eat as well. So.
Wow, what what a story. Thank you for that. That's quite a pivot. Lourdes, did you want to chime in on your organization and any pivots that you have made?
Yeah, for sure. So I think for us, pivoting definitely happened in crisis mode, but I think I was sort of sick of that word even before the pandemic hit, because we felt like we were doing that as an organization throughout the years. You know, I think a lot of why Fresh Roots exists is because leftovers wanted to pivot to find a way to get dignified food access into communities. And so that was probably, you know, one of our biggest things that we did over the more recently. For us in Calgary too, our food bank also closed. And so similar to Paul, we created what we called a CED, COVID Emergency Delivery Service, because fresh food was a gap. And so I remember doing like a media hit on CTV or something, and an elderly woman in one of the communities in Calgary happened to find my number online through one of my other companies and had called me and had asked if we could deliver food to her house because she was really scared to leave her home, because all of the news was saying that seniors shouldn't leave their home. She's asthmatic. She has, you know, multiple health conditions where she was just really terrified to leave. And so that one phone call sort of inspired us to do this delivery service, because she and her friends in her neighborhood were scared to leave their house. So we did an online form where people could request a delivery service for fresh food. So it's about $35 worth of fresh produce. We translated the online form into Vietnamese, Tagalog, traditional and simplified Chinese, Arabic, and Spanish. And we worked with Immigrant Services Calgary And I think we did at peak 100 deliveries a day in both Calgary and Edmonton. And what we were finding, actually the data is super interesting, that the amount that we were donating CERB was about 100 a day. And then when CERB kicked in, you know, the people, at least that we were delivering to, wanted to spend their money on their basic needs. They wanted to choose their food. They wanted to be able to buy what they needed. And so we saw that really drop to about 20 deliveries a day. And we're seeing that start to increase now that CERB, I think, is going to end here in October. So I think that was our big COVID pivot. Ron mentioned that, you know, one of our new programs is called Anew, and part of that is taking home harvest excess. So if you have a fruit tree, or if you have rhubarb, which grows like weeds in Alberta, taking that and bringing it to local restaurants that were really suffering during the pandemic, giving them sort of that donated input, and then them creating an upcycled product from it. So we did that with a few breweries. Pre-pandemic, we donated like stale sour bread because we were finding that agencies, their clients couldn't bite into that really tough bread. And so we were getting that bread to breweries, and they were making bread beer from it. So I think some of these upcycling projects that we were doing over the years turned into another sort of program that we have.
Wow. Whew, all of you just feeding the soul this evening is quite inspirational work that you're doing through this crisis, and yeah, just really inspired by that. So next up, we're going to talk about the future. Oops, I'm not sure why it's skipping so much, but we're going to go back. So we're going to talk about the demands of the future, demands of tomorrow. So impact organizations are consistently challenged with their ability to meet the demands of today, while also anticipating and trying to meet the demands of tomorrow. Cities, we know, are changing and really quickly. And so the question I want to ask is, how does your organization try to understand what that future looks like, and how do you prepare for that? So I guess we can start with Paul, and like, what are your thoughts on what the future holds for food? And in particularly your organization and your specific way of providing food, how do you think that might change, and how do you think your organization will step up to try to meet those changes, or that change?
I think you know, it's a tough question because I can't see into the future, so I don't know what the future holds. But what I can say is, you know, we partnered, I think I mentioned a little bit of this, we partnered with a group out of U of T called Proof, and we conducted some research to look at the intersections of food insecurity and what it means to be Black in this country, and actually found that Black Canadians are 3.5 times more likely to be food insecure than white folks in Canada. So, you know, learning about the disproportionate way in which Black and Indigenous folks experience food insecurity in this country, you know, in terms of how we evolve and how our programs evolve, it's really making sure that that's at the core and the center of our work, and making sure that Black and Indigenous folks have opportunities to access leadership positions and roles at FoodShare, and be a part of the solution finding. So that's really, really key to us, and making sure that, you know, we have spaces where we can, so we have an advisory committee, for example, made up of folks that are predominantly Black, Indigenous, and other racialized folks. We have an Indigenous advisory circle that helps direct our work. So really making sure that we continue to listen to those groups, and that we're, you know, we maintain our race-based lens around race and gender, also around these issues of food insecurity.
Yeah, I've been thinking about the whole idea of leadership and diversity, and, you know, based on our lived experiences, what we find to be important is going to be different from somebody else. So if everyone in leadership looks the same and has same lived experiences, they tend to find what's important to be different from those who are marginalized and not represented. So, I work a bit in the space of innovation and creativity, and for me, it's kind of like, if you don't have diversity, then your ability to meet the challenges of tomorrow is going to be very, very, very limited. And you can even see that with climate change and how we try to tackle that issue as well, because we know it's going to continue predominantly impact those who are low income and live in parts of the world that are deemed third world and stuff like that. So thanks for that, Paul. Rand, do you want to step up and talk about what you could see challenges of tomorrow being for Fresh City?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of challenges. And so I guess, when I think of the future, there's parts of it that I think are going to happen and that are pretty, I don't know if agnostic is the right word as to what their implications are. So, for example, more and more food is going to be sold online, and we're certainly positioning ourselves to that. And I think that is not good or bad per se. It's just something that's going to happen. People are going to use different channels to get their food. But I think for me, the most interesting questions around what the future looks like, and certainly, the way we as a company respond to it, is around what our food system looks like. And, I think we're in this really, really pregnant time of potential right now, where I do think, fundamental change can happen in a way that it wasn't possible 6 months ago. I think, in kind of things on my wish list are, things like, a universal income and, higher minimum wage, and changing how the migrant labor system works, and a kind of a Green New Deal that has a big food component embedded into it. So I think when we talk about the future, there's this, everyone can have their kind of version of what they want it to look like. But ultimately there's a very strong status quo that is trying to shape it a certain way. And I think I've never been more hopeful than now that we can shape it in a way that's more inclusive. But I can't, I don't think it's an inevitability by any stretch. I think there's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of work, a lot of it, frankly, I think it's going to depend on how the second wave plays out, and who's able to pick up the microphone ultimately.
Lourdes, how's Leftovers anticipating the future and trying to prepare for it? And the point is well made by Paul and Rand. We don't know what the future holds for sure, but we kind of, inevitably think about it.
Yeah, for sure. I'm constantly thinking about it, or my board is asking me to anyways. So I think for us, we really want to incubate more. We want to work together with other organizations. I think some of what came up during when COVID first hit, we were approached by companies. I'll talk about Co-Rise. They're in Calgary. They're an awesome company that repurposes spent grains from different breweries. And so they take that sort of onus and fee off of breweries, like that tipping fee away from them, and they take that and they create different products. And so we're hoping to work more with companies that have that sort of same mission, that creative way of repurposing and redistributing food. And I think for us, what we're really thinking about is, we don't want to work a mile wide and an inch deep. So how can we have stronger roots in a community and work with other organizations so we can really dig deeper with our work? I think some of the data that we've seen around the COVID emergency delivery service and how it was sort of affected with CERB, I think we really want to look into that and really advocate for some of that guaranteed basic income, and really just be advocates for our community and what they need.
Awesome. Could you, you mentioned incubating ideas, and that's something that could be valuable to everyone else here listening, is what does that model look like at your organization? Because you incubate a lot of ideas, and how does that function?
Well, the short answer is there's no model for incubation. We kind of just start something and see if it works. And so there's a couple things we're working on now. There's a Pay What You Want Cafe that we're working with in partnership with a larger nonprofit organization. There's, the upcycling projects. What we want to do is we want to engage our team in thinking creatively about what we can do with some of this excess, avoidable and unavoidable. And really not limit them to, we're a charity and we must do this. We want to be able to have that flexibility and make sure that people in our organization are growing and thinking creatively.
Yeah, that's brilliant. We'll move over to Tanya, and just feeding kids, right? It's so important. It's so vital to our future. What do you see the future being, and how do you all approach that at your organization?
Well, after this call, I'll tell you exactly what the future is going to hold. And I don't know the answer. So what we can do is we're really digging into that empathic research. So how do we really learn what our kids and our families need, and how do we respond to that? And then from there, it's because there is so much out of our control and so much unknown in this world, lots of speculations of what's can happen here in the next month, even in schools and kids. So then it's how do we, create a team of people that are agile and they're adaptable. They know what, the design thinking process. How do you take those ideas, that creativity and innovation, and do that empathic research, learn, iterate, fail, try again, redo, learn, that cycle of bettering it and breaking it to match what that empathic research is telling us. So that is sort of where the demands for tomorrow is how we're trying to meet that, is just setting the team up to be working as adaptable and agile as possible to be ready to respond to what the world could bring, and failing and testing and failing again. And back to the mental health thing is then also making sure that those people are cared for, and from our kids to our volunteers to all our stakeholders and people connected to our organization, that they're okay being people-centered so that they can do the work and meet the needs that are being identified.
Yeah, I love that empathic research. So you kind of pivoting and changing as the research comes back to you, and you're like, oh, we found a new need, or we could do a process maybe a bit differently, when you were mentioning earlier the decentralized approach to producing the lunches and stuff like that. So that's brilliant. So next up, we're gonna move on to our next question, which is going to be our last question for this evening, and it's for everybody else watching and anybody else who will watch this in the future. Is, if you came across someone who is passionate about solving food access issues and they asked you for one piece of advice, I know there's lots of advice you can give, but one piece of advice that's been key to your success, what would that be? So with this one, we'll start with Rand.
I would tell them to apply for a job at FoodShare, first of all. I think that'd be the best way to start to solve food access issues. No, honestly, I mean, when I meet people, I think one of the lessons I've learned is to realize that you can't solve all the problems of the world, and it's not your responsibility to. It's that you focus on where that circle of what you're interested and able to do kind of coincides with the problems that need to be solved. and if you try to do too much, you'll either be ineffective and or burn out. So I think the focus is an important thing. And the other thing is that I think ultimately, certainly from a food systems perspective, there are many places where you can affect change. And I think often there is a sense that you need to quit your job and or just dedicate your life full time to this cause, which obviously is great if you can do that or if you want to do that. But there's I always tell people, like, there's, whether you're at a company or in the government or in various places of power, you can try to impact how that power is being exercised. And I can't tell you how many moments of frustrations I've had with people not utilizing the power or abusing the power they have. So a small example, like, we have beehives here. I'm at the office, at the back here, and the landlord next door made us move the beehives out because they felt it was a danger to their employees. Or, you work at a company and you can impact, what kind of food gets stocked, or, what charities they can donate to. So I guess that'd be my biggest kind of, the two pieces of advice is focus and realize that you can make change from various perches in society. It doesn't necessarily have to be from what you might think of as, like, this is what a change maker looks like.
Lourdes, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think for me, this is not something that we did prior, but something that I would recommend, that you talk to people in the space beforehand, see what's already out there, see the gaps that you can address. But I think one of the things that we did do was apply an entrepreneurial lens to it, so that you're not tied down by grants and donations, and so you can really be creative in problem solving. I think that's one thing that we constantly do in our organization is make sure that there's that entrepreneurial lens, so that we can iterate and have some non-restrictive funding, so we can make sure that we're serving community the way we want to and the way the community is asking us to, not not having a funder tell us how to spend that money.
Awesome. Paul?
Yeah, I guess, folks coming to this work and wanting to do work around food insecurity or poverty, I would just remind them and encourage them to, continue to be outraged. We live in a country that is one of the richest countries on the planet. And I think it's, like, outrageous that there are 5 million people that don't have enough food to eat. So, and like I said before, since 1981, we've been focused on food banking. We've been focused on food-based responses. There actually was a way before that. Before 1981, we followed a lot of European nations in advancing income-based interventions. So better is possible. That is the most important advice that I would share with someone. And we just have to be willing to ask ourselves the tough questions, willing to be wrong, but most importantly, willing to fight for what's better.
Tanya, what are your thoughts?
Great advice for everybody. That's awesome, you guys. I guess my thoughts would be, on top of all that's been said, is your mindset, so is how do you have that abundance and growth mindset? Because yeah, you have to be outraged, and it is a battle, and to get through it, you have to see the opportunities. Even the gift of COVID is an opportunity for us to be innovative and creative and meet the needs in that. So for me, the advice is choose your mindset to how you want to tackle these issues.
Brilliant. Wow, I know it's been quite a conversation, and I just want to thank you all for choosing to be a panelist on this at this event. And I'd like to thank all the guests for joining us today. It was, like I said, it was quite the exploration of what it takes to drive positive change in the world. Obviously, I would like to thank all the volunteers at Imagine Cities, including our own webcast production team. Like was said earlier, it takes a village. and it definitely takes a village here at Imagine Cities. I think, you know, our organization and so many amazing organizations from around the world are a testament to what we can do if all of us did a little bit to build happier communities rooted in belonging and opportunity. And you can follow us on social media and sign up for our newsletter. www.imagincities.com is our website. If you know people, companies, organizations who might be interested in our work, you know, encourage them to join our community of creative problem solvers. Just a reminder, this is our public service announcement. Just a reminder, be careful with your social media consumption. Our health advisory recommendations are to take off your notifications, turn them off, detox from social media regularly, and I mean just put your phone away. Don't turn on your phone as soon as you wake up, and put your phone away at least an hour before bed. And follow users that bring you joy and happiness. And that public health advisory comes from my partner, who regularly reminds me about that. And you know, stay tuned as we pilot more programs and products to support building better cities. Feedback is always appreciated, and thank you for joining us, and have a great evening.